I call, you respond. Yeah. Good evening, everyone. My name is Charlotte Lewis. I'm the president of the Queens Chapel Civic Association. I appreciate everyone's attendance tonight. I know that others will be coming in. It's 7:05, and everyone who knows me knows that I appreciate your time as much as mine, and I like to start things on time. We're honored this evening to have the Attorney General with us and Captain Terry from the 4th Police District. And Councilmember Parker will be coming. He's coming in from another meeting. And so, having said that, I'd like to ask Pastor Relford, who is the pastor of Union Wesley AME Zion, and our partner, to please give the opening prayer.
I want to say thanks to Charlotte Lewis for the opportunity for us to gather, for us to meet here and have some conversation and dialogue as it relates to our issue that brings us here tonight, public safety. Please know that there are others that will be streaming the service, this dialogue and discussion. They'll have the opportunity to put their questions in the chat is what they'll be able to do. So we're looking for a very lively, encouraging, edifying conversation, okay? Let's pray. Eternal God, our Heavenly Father, Lord, we thank you for another day. And God, we thank you for bringing us to this place, this space that is your house of worship. But God, we understand that the church is called to do more than just worship on Sunday. So, Lord, we're gathered in this space today to be educated, to be informed, to listen to community leaders as well as ask critical questions. God, this is our community and we care about it. And God, if we're honest with you, this is a very volatile time. God, we don't like much of what we are seeing and hearing when it comes to public safety. So, Lord, we pray that you will be present, that you will lead, guide, and direct our time together. God, keep us mindful that this is your house. We reverence this space. We respect the church. So, God, in our dialogue, in what we share in this space, it will be respectful unto you. Thank you for the leadership of Charlotte Lewis for bringing us here together. We ask that you'll continue to bind us together with cords that cannot be broken. It is to that end that we offer this prayer. In Jesus' precious name, amen.
Amen. Thank you. As we all know, the Queens Chapel Civic Association has held most of our meetings this year by Zoom, and that started during the pandemic, and we continued it because it was just a matter of convenience. But we decided that as the weather got better, that we would try, with the cooperation of Union Wesley, to do one or two face-to-face in-person meetings, and tonight is probably the first of two. And so, having said that, I'd like to understand that there will be no committee reports tonight. We've left all of the time for our speakers to talk about public safety in the city as well as within Ward 5. And we're going to start first with Attorney General Brian Schwab. Mr. Schwab, thank you.
Well, good evening. It's nice to be back here, Queens Chapel, and also in this church. Pastor Relford, thank you for your hospitality and your leadership. It's always good to be here. Ms. Lewis, thank you for your leadership. You and your husband have been the epitome of what it means to be engaged citizens and focusing on how our city and our communities are safer. I tell people that government plays a really important role. The Office of Attorney General obviously plays an important role, but government cannot do it without an engaged citizenry and community. And so I so appreciate what you do, and I'm looking forward to the conversation this evening, Councilmember Parker, and I'm delighted to be here with MPD and talking about what I know is on people's minds in terms of public safety. Those of you who have heard me speak before know that one of my heroes was my dad, and before he died, he said, there's a reason God gives us two ears and one mouth. We should try to go through life listening twice as much as we talk, and the Office of Attorney General, under my leadership, is committed to putting that into action. We've been listening to people across the city. We've been in multiple community meetings. We've been in 6 of the 8 wards. Just in the first 4 months. We'll be in Ward 1 tomorrow night, and then I think Ward 7 next week. We were earlier up at Lamont Riggs Library here and been a couple times in Ward 5. And the reason why we're doing that is twofold. One, it's very important to me that the community know how to reach us and to know what the Office of Attorney General does. I heard a lot during the campaign that people generally knew we had an Office of Attorney General. They were aware of the fact that it became an elected position relatively recently. But beyond that, what the office does, how it's structured, how it can help people in their lives, too few people really understood that. So we knew we had to do a better job of getting out and explaining that, and I'm going to run through a couple of slides just to do that. But perhaps more importantly, it's important for us to be in community so we're hearing directly from people on the ground about what's happening in their lives, whether the city is responding to what their needs are, where there are issues that we can address in real time. We want to be able to do that. So to me, community engagement is one of the most important things we do to make sure we can do our job as well as we possibly can. So with that, let me run through a couple of slides and then we can turn it over and have a conversation. Okay. So if we can go to the first slide, Ty. Let's see, go to the next one. All right. So I don't know if everybody can see this, but we have 4 basic priorities in the Office of Attorney General, and these are priorities that were informed by listening to people in the community. The first is prioritizing public safety and youth development. As many of you know, the Office of Attorney General is responsible for juvenile justice and the prosecution of young people in our city. The U.S. Attorney's Office has responsibility for most adult violent crime. Our focus on keeping the city safe and our community safe is not limited to simply responding to criminal charges where the police may come with a charge against a young person, but really to be engaged in young people's lives and recognizing that raising healthy, hopeful young people is good for the kids. It's also good for our city. Hopeful kids are safer for themselves and for those around them. The second priority is promoting equity in our communities. We have a city abundant in resource, incredible environmental beauty, incredible historical and cultural resources, outstanding human talent, really smart people, and a financial picture in our city that is, for many, the apple of people's eyes in terms of our bond rating and our budget. The challenge for Washington, D.C. is making sure those resources are shared fairly and equitably across the city, because those resources are what lend themselves to opportunities. And too many people in our city are not enjoying the full benefit of the opportunities that these abundant resources lead to. So our office is committed to using the law to try to narrow those gaps, the equity gaps that we have in income and in wealth, in business ownership, home ownership, access to healthy food and to health care. All of that is a priority for the Office of Attorney General. The third priority is standing up for democratic values and advancing statehood. This is everything from supporting voting rights, supporting reproductive freedom, standing up against hate, white supremacy, homophobia, anti-Semitism, to advocating for the autonomy that our city should have, that our community should have. I did not necessarily realize that when I was running for office so quickly, the issue was going to come to a head with respect to Congress deciding that it was going to get very much involved in our local affairs. And I know we can talk a little bit about that tonight with the crime bill, police reform bill, and other things that are working their way through our legislative process up through Congress. The final priority for my office is really more of an internal priority, and that's enhancing the institutional excellence of the Office of Attorney General. We aspire to be the best law firm in the country. Not the best attorney general's office, not the best public interest firm, but the best law office, because our job is to represent the residents of the District of Columbia and our government and the public interest. And we have an extraordinary competitive advantage in that the talent pool of lawyers and professionals here in the District of Columbia who want to put their talents and efforts towards the greater good is really extraordinary. So as DC residents and taxpayers, we should be very grateful for the kind of law office we have, but we can be better. We can train and recruit and mentor and build the excellence of the office and get better, and so we're committed to doing that. I recognize that I'm a temporary steward in this role, and so my job is to make sure I leave the office better than as I find it. It is an elected office. It is important that it's political and accountable to the voters in the District of Columbia. It gives it a very important direct connection to our clients who we represent, but it also always has to be an office that is above politics, that is built on the rule of law and on the excellence of the lawyering that's going to get done. So if we go to the next slide, what we do in the Office of Attorney General can basically be thought of as a three-legged stool. We are responsible for representing the District of Columbia. We're the chief law office of the District of Columbia. That means defending the city, the agencies. Occasionally, if MPD gets sued or other agencies get sued, the Office of Attorney General are the lawyers that defend the agencies. We also are giving advice to the mayor and the council and the agencies on legal issues. The corporate tax, transactional bond, eminent domain work that has to get done to run the city is done by professionals in the Office of Attorney General. So that first leg of the stool is the chief law office of the city. The second is protecting the public interest. The statute charges the Office of Attorney General with defending and protecting the public interest. It's not defined by statute. That means protecting the environment, protecting seniors, protecting consumers, making sure our housing laws are enforced, that our consumer protection laws are enforced, that our worker protection laws are enforced. All of that falls into protecting the public interest in Washington, D.C. The third leg of the stool, as what I've alluded to earlier, is prosecuting juvenile crime. And that is our obligation to hold young people, defined as younger than 18, accountable when they break the law, when they break the criminal law. But the juvenile justice system is different than the adult criminal justice system in one major respect. The statute says we have to treat kids as kids. We have to recognize that kids are different than adults, and that we are committed not only to holding kids accountable and making sure the public is safe, but also to rehabilitation, to making sure that the process leads to kids being able to get back on track and live lives of independent hope and lawfulness. So those are the obligations of the Office of Attorney General, the three legs of the stool. Next slide. Just because this often comes up in conversation, it's important to know that the Attorney General, I am elected every 4 years. I am responsive to the people who hired me, which is the voters of the District of Columbia. The U.S. Attorney's Office is led by a U.S. Attorney that's appointed by the President, not elected by the residents of the District of Columbia. But I will say, when we have a president like President Biden, we have a U.S. Attorney like Matt Graves, we have a very responsive federal government to the district. But make no mistake, at the end of the day, the decisions from that office are not made in a way that are directly accountable to the voters. So there's an important democracy distinction between the U.S. Attorney's Office and the Office of the Attorney General. As I mentioned, the Office of the Attorney General, my office prosecutes primarily juvenile crime and some adult misdemeanors. The U.S. Attorney's Office prosecutes all adult felonies, serious violent crimes that occur in the city. We can talk more about the fact that we have this bifurcated criminal justice system in our city, and that, to me, is a question about statehood and autonomy and some of the challenges we have in terms of really enhancing public safety when we only have a part of the system under control of the elected officials in our city. Next slide. And I think this one is probably the most important one. If you have a camera or you want to jot down, we really do want to hear from you. And there are lots of ways to stay in touch with us, to reach out to us. We have hotlines with respect to certain issues like housing, consumer protection, workers' rights issues. You can email us. Our Office of Community Engagement will be, I promise, in response to your questions or your inquiries, back in touch with you. We can do our job better if we are in regular communication with people in the community, and so I invite you to reach out to us. So with that, let me stop and save some room for others. I'm happy to engage in some conversation about whatever specifics might be on your mind. I know, Charlotte, you have some questions for us.
Well, I think I'd like to hear from Captain Terry, who is our captain from the 4th Police District, so that he can give us an update as to where the community stands with respect to crime and some of the concerns that we have encountered, and then we can open it up to questions.
I'm Captain John Terry of the 4th District. I'm in charge of Sector 2 in the 4th District. That's PSAs 405, 406, and 407. The Queens Chapel community lies in PSA 406, the southern part, and borders the PSA 405. So I am the midnight captain, so I generally work overnight. You really won't see me around too much during the day, but I do make an appearance every now and then. But it's my responsibility to run that shift and also to be in control of the sector 24 hours a day. So that those 3 PSAs. So if you have any questions, concerns, generally you'll email me. If you don't hear from me, you'll hear from one of the 3 lieutenants that also work with me and that I supervise. And there's 1 lieutenant for each shift. The lieutenant that's specifically responsible for your community will be Lieutenant Nick Rizzi, who works in the evening tour. So pretty easy to get in touch with Nick. He works from about noon to 10:30 at night, so really the heat of the day when we see a lot of our issues. But as far as the Queens Chapel community, it's been relatively quiet over the last few months. Obviously, as the weather gets warm, things start to pick up, and we've seen in the 4th District sort of a rash of, I don't think it'll be any surprise to anyone in here, motor vehicle thefts have been a big issue, really across the entire city, but in the 4th District as well, and specifically in PSA 406, we've seen a drastic increase in some of our motor vehicle thefts. And that is in relation to this viral video that came out about. So the Kias and Hyundais have a technical flaw in the vehicle, and so there was this sort of social media sensation on how to steal these vehicles very easily. So we've seen that really across the city, but particularly in the 4th District. A lot of that crime has been driven by juveniles and juvenile offenders. But I will say that in the last couple months, the 4th District is one of the only districts where we've seen that start to level off and scale back. I think some strides we've made with the Office of the Attorney General, some arrests we've made, and some working with Child and Family Services and some other city agencies, we've been able to really combat that in the 4th District. And I know that particularly that's been an issue in the Queens Chapel area. I think this last month is the first month where we've seen our Kia and Hyundai thefts match our normal motor vehicle thefts. You have vehicles that are left parked or left parked running. Our numbers are right about the same. We were seeing 3 or 4 times the number of Kia and Hyundai thefts that we saw in relation to those other offenses. As far as sort of around your neighborhood, we do see some quality of life things, thefts, and some lesser offenses, but we haven't seen the violent crime. And I would say for 2022, the 4th District saw the largest decrease in violent crime in the entire city. I think as we've lost officers, as we've lost members, manpower has become an issue, and as we started to shift our deployment and how we police, just not only with the manpower numbers, but sort of society, what society has asked of the police department and what's expected of us. It's sort of been a bit of a shift, but despite all that, we were able to reduce violent crime in the 4th District total overall 12%, which is a significant increase over the other police districts. And I really do have high hopes. We've implemented some initiatives, our focus patrol model, so we're going more to an intelligence-led policing. And these are all buzzwords, obviously, but just trying to target certain areas and not, target certain areas based on the community concerns and sort of what our statistics are telling us, and trying to tailor our methods and our police work to those things.
Okay, we'd like to open to questions now, and we have a microphone in each aisle. So if you have questions, we do encourage you to use the mics. Yes. Yes. Thank you.
My question is mainly for the officer. We keep reading in the paper that the number of police officers in the city is down. I'm sure there are lots of reasons for that. I think salary might be part of it. And I know people are trying to correct that, but it's going to be a long haul. So could you just comment on that issue and what you think will really be able to turn it around?
I don't think that's really an easy answer. I think some of that is sort of the way society views policing. I think some of that is, I think a large part is just sort of a cultural shift in how younger people look at jobs and careers. I know, I think with COVID, we had the Great Resignation where people were leaving their nice office jobs and leaving and saying, we have all these options for professions and ways to make money and whatnot. When I came on, like a pension was a big deal, like having a pension. And I think nowadays, people, it's not as big a deal. Sort of quality of life is a big thing. Spending time with your family, working in a job that's not as high stress. There's so many options for careers now. And so many people go to college, and so they have those doors open for them. So I don't know that there's an easy answer for that. I know that we have a lot of young people come on, and then they leave for, who really wants to work weekends? Who really wants to work every holiday and be away from your family? So I think societally, things are shifting on what is important. It used to be maybe providing, having a stable job where you could provide for your family, but now there's so many options on how, like I said, on professions and education-wise. So I know that our recruiting division is really hard at work trying to entice people to come in. We've had the signing bonuses. We've had a recent salary increase. And really, we as a police department are trying things that maybe will entice people to stay here. Because really, it doesn't matter how many people you hire if you can't keep them here. So we've gone to 3 days off. We're going to a more interactive model, challenging our officers to come up with creative ways to interact with the community and to combat crime instead of sort of the older model of policing of just like answer the radio and you sit here on this corner and make sure crime doesn't occur. So I think really trying to engage our membership, but also I know that the cadet program has been a big deal for DC. Just trying to get the young people, especially from the community, especially from areas where there might be some issues with crime and violence and some broken families, trying to entice people to work with the police department and get an education and have us pay your salary and stuff. So I know the mayor and the chief who was a former cadet have tried to expand that cadet program and try to sort of entice some younger people in and reach out to maybe some populations that we haven't reached out to before to try to entice people in.
Yes.
I hear a lot about how the crime has increased throughout the city. Can you expand upon your statement that it's down 12% in the 4th District? Is that compared to pre-COVID, or was last year just a really high crime rate?
So that 12% is down from 2021. So that 2022 number is down 12% from 2021. And this is sort of something I've run into through a lot of our community meetings is people are saying, well, crime's up. And I think there are some offenses that are up. I think our carjackings are up. Our motor vehicle thefts are up, but we've been able to kind of curtail some other crimes. And I think that some of that is our strategy and some of that is just a shift in the types of crimes people are committing. But I will also say that, like I said, I've put out that 12% reduction number quite a bit. And I think the overwhelming answer we get from the community is that we don't feel safer in our community, which is a major issue. So I will say the numbers don't lie. The numbers say that crime is down in the 4th District, at least. There are some areas where crime has been increasing, but in the 4th District itself, our crime is down 12%. That said, the reduction could have been 50%, but if you don't feel safe in your community, obviously, well, what's the point? So I think that's one thing we're trying to work on, sort of, is the perception and trying to make people feel safer and being more engaged with the community in that respect. And so
It's mostly violent crime that's down?
yeah, so we had a 12% reduction in violent crime. I think our property crime was down maybe 1 or 2%. Okay. But that overall violent crime number is down significantly.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe I'll just add in there. It's such an important point that Captain Terry raises, which is oftentimes there's this discrepancy between what the numbers and the data tell us is happening and the way we feel. And so I think both are important, particularly for leadership of your community, because I don't think data and statistics ever are particularly comforting if you or a loved one has been a victim of a crime or you're not feeling safe. Nobody should be the victim of a crime. That should be all of our aspirations. However, the data does help us understand where do we stand historically, how do we allocate resources, how do we separate out in terms of sound policies, and following the data and the numbers helps us get smarter. So one of the things that we keep a close eye on is looking at the number of crimes, the kind of crimes that we're seeing young people engaged in. And we are seeing changes in the way young people are showing up in the criminal justice system. And it's important. And I was outspoken in previous years where I thought that the issue of juvenile crime was being politicized unfairly. And I think I got to be candid and honest when the numbers are different. So historically, the number of juvenile arrests were much, much lower than the media and that some of the politics made it sound like. We heard so much during the political season about kids being out of control, and when we looked at the numbers, I think the last numbers are maybe for the 22 year, fiscal year, so they're now about 8-9 months old, that notwithstanding all of that conversation, less than 10% of the arrests that were being made were of young people. And that's not prosecutions, that's not convictions, that's arrests. We are now, so I was outspoken about that, because not that it was okay to have those kids doing things like that, but let's not vilify the kids, because when you do that, lots of other bad things start happening that we don't want to have happen in our community. Because really kids are doing such amazing things across our country and our city. We just don't get enough airtime about the narrative of what great work young people are doing. And it's very demoralizing. You know, when a senator from Tennessee testifies that the kids in our schools are, what do you call it, inmate factories? Can you imagine being going to school and hearing a nationally elected official think that you're just about to be a criminal if you're in DC schools? I mean, it's so corrosive. So we have to be honest about that, and I was outspoken. Now, what I will say is what we are seeing now is concerning, because while the numbers aren't much greater in terms of the number of arrests, kids are showing up with more serious crimes for their first arrest. That's worrisome. And we have too many guns in our city. We should talk about that. But because we have so many guns in our city, kids are showing up with their first arrest with a gun. And what's even more troubling is some of those kids are showing up much earlier. And so I'm a believer that when we have to balance, when we're talking about data and numbers, and we recognize, as Captain says, that any one crime can have a feeling of discomfort, we have to be honest about what the numbers are indicating to us, regardless of where you are in it. And so we are very conscious of trying to track the data and understand why some of these trends are happening and play our role with respect to reducing crime. I'm delighted. In fact, I'm gonna hope that there's some method behind what Captain Terry has found that's worked here in this community, because having a 12% reduction in violent crime is a really significant fact. Not that any remaining crime is okay, but there are probably some factors we could learn about what's happening here in this community and in the 4th District that would help us say, okay, would that maybe work in other parts of our city?
Do we have a question?
Yeah, two things. The first one just came about when you mentioned that senator who made that insane statement about
Yes.
DC public schools. Did your office contact them to give them facts and stats to counteract what they said?
I was very vocal and engaged with seemingly yelling into the abyss of our national Congress when the conversation around the crime bill and some of the comments were being made. I offered to go up to the Hill to talk with people. I reached out with letters. I was shocked that the response was nobody ever calls back. Nobody ever wants to engage. And I heard somebody say, he was asked, what's your position on the crime bill? And he said, I haven't read it, I haven't been briefed on it, but I'm against it. And that's just the recognition that we're being used as a political football in a conversation that isn't really about public safety in the District of Columbia. So it's a frustrating but wake-up call about kind of the way we're going to be treated by a national Congress in which we have no voting members.
Okay, thank you. Now, the original question is for the officer. Is that your helicopter who's been hovering over the neighborhood since the beginning of January between the hours of 10:30 and midnight 12:30? It doesn't have a flashlight or searchlight on. Mm-hmm. It interestingly enough comes in from Prince George's County, and it's hovering over our backyards. I was out there in my backyard about two Tuesdays ago. Mm-hmm. And it was over our backyard. So initially we're thinking, oh, they're searching for somebody, but it didn't have a searchlight on. And the fact that it's coming in and leaving towards Prince George's County over Eastern Avenue. I'm like, what's going on? Is that your helicopter? And if not, how can we find out who it is? Because I know my windows shake when it's hovering.
Yeah, it would probably depend on the instance. I know that we get Montgomery County's helicopter over quite a bit. Prince George's County Park Police flies their helicopter quite a bit as well. Generally, our helicopter doesn't fly unless there's a reason to fly. But there are a few apps. I think Flight Stats or Flight Radar is one of them. I know the Fairfax County Police helicopter flies over my house several times a week. And so that's what I use to track their police helicopter when we're trying to figure out what's going on in our neighborhood. But there are some apps out there that will do that. But I will say that this is sort of an interesting area because we do get a lot of collaboration with Montgomery County, Prince George's County, Park Police, and some of those other local agencies. So it could be ours. It may not be, though. I think I use Flight Radar, but Flight Stats or Flight Radar. Yeah. I'm sure if you search next door, that helicopter question comes up, I think, pretty unanimously in this area. Between DC, Virginia, and Maryland, a lot of times in the comments you'll be able to see.
Is there any coordination from the department with the other departments?
So we all have access to each other's radios. So if Montgomery County maybe is following a stolen car into DC, they'll be able to switch over to our radio and tell us, hey, we're over a car and we're seeing, this is what we're seeing. I know recently we've even had Arlington County come over with their helicopter. So there is a lot of collaboration. It's not just they're just flying over and doing nothing. Generally, they have a reason. Fuel is very expensive, so generally there's a reason, and we are able to communicate real time with all these other agencies as well.
Okay.
Yeah.
Right, but no searchlight. I mean, it just seems like if they're training,
Right.
the neighbors are the ones who get inconvenienced.
Right. I mean, are you talking about during the day or during the night?
At night. till
Also, our
10:30
helicopters have a
p.m. to
FLIR on them,
12:30.
so they can heat sense too. So
They
you
can
might not,
what?
They can heat sense, so you might not see that light. And the spotlight is obviously a tool they can use, but that FLIR is like a heat sensing camera, so they might use that too, and you wouldn't see that. That would be an invisible beam. So, yeah.
I think this may be for the three of you. As the summer comes, some people are concerned that some of the activities with our youth, some of the hijackings and things like that may be on the increase. Do any of you know of anything that is planned, talked about for our youth during the summer? You know, obviously when school's out and all like that. Any thoughts on that at all from anyone?
Happy to take a stab at that. Good evening, everyone. I'm Councilmember Zachary Parker. My apologies for showing up late, just coming from another event in our Fort Lincoln community centered around public safety, in fact. A few things I would say. The city just announced that we are expanding hours at our rec centers across the city. And so they are open more days out of the week and longer hours. That is providing recreational opportunities for not just our young people, but our entire communities. Many of our schools will have summer programming to provide outlets for our young people. And as you may know, the DC Council is going through the budget process now. And there are a number of investments that we're making to try to give young people more to do. I'm going to let others talk about more about the public safety approach. But one thing I will flag is just the need and the importance of us getting it right in the school. And so a concern for me is how do we keep more of our young people attending school on time and finishing school? Attendance has declined throughout the pandemic and continues to be an issue. And so there are a number of initiatives that the executive is pursuing, the Deputy Mayor of Education is pursuing, trying to get more young people to school. Some of you may know that if a student has 10 unexcused absences, they are legally, and by they, I see is mandated to flag that family for a CFSA for an investigation. Not every investigation leads to disciplinary action, but there is an effort underway for CFSA to ramp up their investigations to just make sure young people are attending school. So more investments in recreation programming, expanded hours, more investigations to why some of our young people are not attending school, to make sure that we can get them on the front end before they end up in the wrong place.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'll just add to what Councilmember alluded to. We know that keeping kids busy and engaged is critical, and so the more resources we put towards kids having activities during the summer, the better. The Summer Youth Employment Program has been part of the sort of the fabric of our city for kids. I think you have to be 14 years old before you can participate in that, but it reflects the basic philosophy of where we're going to invest our dollars. And when we don't invest in recreation centers and camps and opportunities for kids to get caught up on the learning that they may have fallen behind, and we decide that that isn't a good use of our resources, we can somewhat predict on what kind of consequences we're going to have for that. The Office of Attorney General has a program where it's our high school advisory committee. We are very proud of that program, where we have high schoolers come in and work at the Office of Attorney General, and they're tasked at the end of the summer with making policy recommendations to me in my front office about key issues. So we're trying to do our part too about engaging with young people during the summer, keeping them busy. I used to run a summer camp, and the rules to the counselors would run the kids as hard as you can during the day with whatever activities you're going to get them running to, because then they sleep at night. And so I think that's pretty sound advice that we should be following. But it is a resource issue, and to the council member's point, kids right now are, by and large in the city, really hurting having come out of the pandemic. The ability to learn online was hard for kids, even under the best of circumstances. These are kids who had, good Wi-Fi, quiet places to study, supportive adults, who were helping them stay on track. And even then, we know kids were falling behind. Worse, though, were kids who were falling out. The school was their connection. That was the place where they were going to get what they weren't getting anywhere else in their life. And for nearly 2 years, that was completely cut off. And so kids fell further and further behind. And, I've heard parents talk about the fact that, they're struggling, and their kids would rather, when given the choice between being the dumb kid in class or the bad kid in class, that teenagers often would rather be the bad kid than the dumb kid. So they see these spiraling efforts of sort of acting out, masking the fact that kids have really fallen behind. So it would be wonderful if what we're also thinking about in terms of using the summertime is not a complete break from academics and school, but using that time to hopefully get some kids to catch up on where they are so they can feel like they've got a decent chance at staying on track and graduating.
Yeah, and from a public safety aspect, we do have an outreach team at the 4th District. I think every district has an outreach team that really looks to engage the community, but largely the youth. I know we've had community bike rides and events like that, basketball games and whatnot. So we do try to keep the youth engaged, especially in the summer. And we do collaborate with the Department of Parks and Rec. Not only do we provide security outside of those events and inside of those events, but we do send our outreach team as well to just try to connect and engage with the youth and try to build those relationships.
Thank you so much.
Yes, good evening. I have a question for the Attorney General as well as for the captain. For the Attorney General, you talked about equity when you showed the film, the slide. What process or processes are you instituting in your office in terms of equity, in terms of gentrification? That's one question. And my second question to you, have you visited the DC jail? And have you spent any time there? For the officer, for the captain, my question for you, sir, is you viewed an arrest as quote-unquote success. Is that really how you feel about arresting not just young folk, but anybody, that's a success? And those are my questions.
So let me take the questions you posed to me first. Yes, I have been to the DC jail and spent time there, and without being able to comment about specifics with respect to litigation and other investigations that are going on, we have long been in need of major changes to the way our jail operates. As you know, or probably know, there are two components in the jail, the detention facility and the treatment facility. I think there's a marked difference between the two in terms of facilities. There's some good programming that's happening in the treatment facility, and it is a shame, though, that the conditions of the jail really came to light in a way that they did with the January 6th prisoners who were there, because we've had an issue with the deplorable conditions in our jail for a long, long time, and when it took some, white nationalists who were locked up after J6 to get some attention to it, that speaks volumes. You asked a question about gentrification and equity, and we do have a commitment to equity in the land use process in our city. We have a group called the Equitable Land Use Unit, ELU, and this is a relatively new phenomena in the office where our lawyers, instead of being behind the scenes giving advice to the Office of Planning, the Board of Zoning Appeals, the Zoning Commission, is actually out in front engaging with community and, where appropriate, advocating on particular issues that affect the development in our city. We think about environmental sustainability, we think about displacement, we think about procedural equity and making sure that anybody in the community has a chance to understand how the complicated land use process works, because oftentimes these developments have generational impact on the communities that they're in. ANC commissioners, some of whom have 2 or 3 other jobs, they're not paid, and they have high-powered development teams that come in with lots of lawyers who've thought through all of the impacts of what might a planned unit development be or other types of zoning changes. So our office is engaged through our ELU in making sure that issues about development and the equity impacts of development are being vetted through the process. We have an affordable housing challenge in our city, which we can't solve alone by doing the work we're doing in terms of preserving the housing stock. We're fighting very, very hard to make sure that the existing housing stock in our city is preserved, and that's by taking on landlords and slumlords who are not keeping their units in compliance with the law. But because of the demand that we have in our city for people who want to live here, we don't have enough units for people to live in, and when you don't have enough supply and so much demand, you're going to have ever-increasing costs. So we have to be a community where we are developing and building new units. We have to be a place where capital does want to come and take a risk. But when that happens, when the developers come in and do build and make commitments to the city, we want to make sure they're making the city commitments that they can and will live up to, and that further some of the other side effects, at least mitigating some of the other side effects of development, of which gentrification is a major one. So long answer to your question, yes, we think about equity in terms of gentrification and land use, and also recognize that the conditions in the jail are something that we need to continue to be vigilant about. I will say that there is a Jails and Justice Task Force that issued a 80-point, very concrete set of recommendations on how the jail can be improved, including a total knockdown and rebuilding of the jail. There were dollars in last year's budget to do some of the soft costs and planning for a new construction of a jail, and now we're in a tight budget, season again, and whether there's going to be enough money put towards really, rebuilding, I don't know. Maybe Councilmember Parker has some inside scoop on whether that's part of the horse trading that's going on right now, but it is a major, major concern for us. And I'll riff later on the fact that part of that's because we're not a state, that we don't have the kind of control over the entirety of the way our criminal justice system works, of which the jail plays a major role.
Can you repeat your question? I just want to make sure I understood what you were saying.
Yeah, you referenced an arrest as a success, and I wanted to find out if you believe that arresting someone is a quote-unquote success.
I don't think I ever.
You don't understand?
No, I don't think I ever said that an arrest was a success. I think I spoke about our reduction in violent crime.
Yeah, you said that
as being a success. But I think when you have a reduction in violent crime, you're obviously going to have less arrests, and that would be the goal. I think what we've moved to, at least with sort of our intelligence-led policing models, our focus patrol models, what we look at is we measure success more outcome than statistics. So it's not, hey, officer, how many people did you arrest today? How many people did you arrest this week? How many tickets did you write? That's not the way we're looking at success anymore. What we're doing is we're looking at the ways we engage the community, and that obviously there are some arrests that are going to have to be made in the community. I mean, that's just sort of part of the criminal justice system. But what we're looking at is what have our activities done in a certain area that will drive down disorder and drive down crime? And those often are not just arrests. I mean, often those are community engagement. Those are looking at, walking the halls of a building or checking in on a business. Sometimes they are, holding community events and whatnot. So I don't think there's a success in making an arrest solely. I don't think that's how anyone in MPD would define success. I think we define success by how safe does the community feel and where are our crime stats going.
And the individuals or the persons that are arrested or put into the criminal justice system, you as a police officer, do you view your responsibility to contain or to counsel or to redirect that person's behavior in such a way where it becomes more of a positive for the community as opposed to a negative? I mean, at what point, do you think that, you need to do quote unquote more?
Yeah, I mean, when it comes to making an arrest, obviously an arrest is just a small portion of that's the initial contact essentially that an offender has with the criminal justice system. So, I mean,
I'm talking about youth now. I'm not talking about.
I'm talking about youth.
Yeah.
I mean, the youth. The way we deal with youth in the criminal justice system is entirely different than adults. Obviously, we've spoken about that already today. I think the ultimate goal would be to rehabilitate and kind of steer youth to that direction. That's why the Office of the Attorney General has diversion and youth courts and whatnot, and ways to redirect youth out of the system. But I mean, as far as MPD,
you don't have that.
What's that?
You don't have what the Attorney General has.
Well, like I said, I think to see the youth criminal justice system as separate entities between MPD and the OAG, I think it's more than that. I think it's a team together trying to make that happen.
And I can add just to add to that, sometimes MPD does divert young people without them bringing them to our office. We have a diversion program, which I think is a very positive development. We piloted the recognition that some low-level crimes from young people are much better addressed by not bringing them into the criminal justice system. So when the MPD brings us a young person, sometimes we divert, but what's great is MPD also sometimes diverts without them ever coming. And we have a very good ongoing conversation. We have a 24-hour hotline where we're in communication with MPD, because I do think there is a recognition that kids are different. The law requires us to recognize that children are treated different. And particularly when we can get kids back on track, we know the deeper kids get into the criminal justice system, the worse results we have. Now, sometimes we have no choice. Sometimes public safety requires us, as much as we would prefer not, to have to seek a detainment of a young person. But when we have the ability maybe to divert away from it, we do have processes in place, and MPD uses that it's called an ACE diversion program, alternative to court engagement, I think is the acronym, and I think that has shown some good success.
Thank you.
Quick question. Attorney General Swab, rehabilitation, I would imagine, falls from your office to Youth Services Division, correct? And if the answer is true, do you believe they're doing a very good job in rehabilitating these youthful offenders? And because, again, then the second thing I want to talk to, I'm from the old school. I really believe that I'm losing Chief Conte, and I got the impression Chief Conte is leaving because he really feels that his hands are tied in fighting crime. And if that is true, then between the two of you, police officer and Councilman, Attorney General Swab, and then Councilman Parker, who should be at the forefront of fighting crime? Should we leave it to the police department to do exactly what they're supposed to do and fight crime and take some of that other stuff and put it someplace else? Because I get the impression, and right now, that the police department hands are, this is my view, are tied. Conte is leaving because I think he's frustrated. And then there's one other thing that you said that caught my attention when we were talking about the crime bill. I got the impression from your inference that you were probably for it. And then I got the impression from Chief Conte that he was against it because he thought it was going to make it difficult. In that case, who was right?
Mr. Swain, great to see you. Thank you for always being engaged. And I know how much you care about kids and how long you have been in this space. You have a perspective that I appreciate and I learn from. So to answer your thoughts, you are correct that when a young person is determined to be guilty of a juvenile delinquency offense, criminal offense, they can be committed to the Department of Youth Rehabilitative Services. That is a executive agency that is charged with rehabilitation and sometimes confinement of kids pending that rehabilitation process. The visibility of how that agency is doing, the data to support it, the transparency, in my view, is not great. Part of that is because appropriately we have a confidentiality statute that protects young people, because we do want young people to get a chance at being rehabilitated, and having a record that's in public is believed to be an impediment to that. I think the Office of Attorney General, however, should have greater transparency into what's happening with young people after we have prosecuted a young person, and if the court has committed that person to DYRS, to see how they're doing. We would like to know, for example, if a young person's commitment status is changing, if they're coming back into the community. We would like to have better communication on that. So thus far into my four months role in seeing this, I think there's an opportunity for there to be a better flow of information from which I'd be able to answer your question about whether I think they're doing a very good job or not. We have a very good youth rehabilitative model in the District of Columbia relative to other states. And we've been a leader in that space. But whether we're doing as well as we can in making sure young people get the resources they need, what do we mean by that? So many young people, when they are committing acts that are hurting people, they are victims as much as they are offenders. We know that hurt people hurt people. The numbers tell us that there's very little difference. If you looked at the population of young people who are committing crimes, they have been the victims of crime. They have been experiencing trauma in their own lives. So they need attention. They need the cognitive behavioral therapy and attention to their mental health in particular. I mentioned they've fallen behind in school. They need the academic support. They need the structural support that comes. And so we need to deliver on that promise. If we're gonna lock kids up, we got to make sure that we're living up to the promise of also getting them the resources they need. As far as, I don't know that Chief Conte's leaving because he's feeling like his hands are tied or he's frustrated. I have great respect for the chief. I like him personally. I think he's been a good police chief for us. He has a wonderful opportunity to keep on going in terms of the national profile And that's good for us in the Washington, D.C., because our chief is going out not in a disgraceful way that some chiefs get run out of town, but with a big old promotion to the FBI. It's not easy to be a police chief, you know. I don't think my job's easier, but I wouldn't trade to be, you know, a police officer or police chief. Their jobs are really hard, and doing it 3 years plus, what a chief, he's got 18, 20 years in.
30, I think, yeah.
Is that
He's
what
like 20,
yeah, so I don't know that I agree with you that he's leaving for that reason. The chief and I agreed with respect to 95% of the crime bill. In fact, 95% of the crime bill was non-controversial. There were 2 or 3 things about the crime bill that people were disagreeing about. And reasonable minds can disagree on those points, and I respect the chief's view on those. I just happen to think that he had the shorter end of the stick in terms of the arguments. They were about mandatory minimums. They were about the maximum sentence that certain crimes could result in, and they were about whether or not you're entitled to a jury trial if you're charged with a misdemeanor. Those were really the 3 issues that were dividing the community here in D.C. Now, as a matter of D.C. democracy, we had a 10-plus year effort to modernize our crime bill. We've got an antiquated statute. It was passed back in the early 1900s. It's only been cobbled together with court decisions and amendments. So we have a lot of inconsistency in our crime bill right now, in our crime law. And when you have inconsistency in a crime, in what the criminal laws are, you get in the way of administering justice in an efficient, expeditious way. And most prosecutors will tell you that the length of a sentence is not what deters people from committing crime. What deters people from committing crime is the certainty and swiftness with which the process is going to result in a verdict. When you have uncertainty in your laws, you make the efficiency of your administration of justice all the worse. So we needed to modernize our crime bill. We needed to bring it into the modern era. And those areas of disagreement ended up being ones that our democratic process over a 10-year period through our council passed legislation. There was negotiation and horse trading, as there always is. Everybody was heard. Unanimous approval by the council. The mayor vetoed it, as was her prerogative as the executive. The council overrode the veto, as was its prerogative. Our democracy was working, and it became the law until Congress, which certainly has no better understanding of how we're going to keep our city safe than we do, has no greater stake in our safety than we do, doesn't have people who necessarily live here year-round like we do, decided it was going to come in and heavy-hand us. And when, as I said, you have an elected official say, I didn't read the bill, I haven't been briefed on the bill, but I'm against the bill, there's something wrong with that. So I hope that's responsive to your question.
Good afternoon, gentlemen. My name is Fred Carney. I live in the neighborhood. I'm a D.C. government employee. My question is this. It has to do with our workers' comp law. Mr. Schwab, Attorney General Schwab, and City Councilman Parker. First, I want to say that I'm not attacking because I voted for both of you. I don't have a problem with that. I voted for you because I thought you were the most qualified. But if you work for Walmart up the street and you fall down and break your leg at work, the workers' comp law in the District of Columbia says that it is presumed that your injury is compensable. If you go to a doctor and a doctor says that you have a multiple fracture, the testimony of your doctor, the opinion of your treating doctor, has greater weight under the law than the employer's doctor or insurance company's doctor. If you work for Walmart and one of the customers physically attack you and you become depressed or have a psychological injury, the law in the District of Columbia says that claim is compensable, and it's on the employer to rebut that presumption. If you work for the district government, like you, Mr. Parker, and you, Mr. Schwab, the police have their own workers' comp. The burden is on you to prove your injury is work-related and therefore compensable. Gentlemen, both of you, regardless of what your doctor says, under the District of Columbia law, you do not get a treating physician preference. Your doctor's opinion is given the same weight legally, this is in the law, as the insurance company's doctor, which happens to be your employer, the district government. If you get a psychological injury on the job, the law for district government employees says that that is not compensable under workers' compensation law. The Workers' Compensation Act for the District of Columbia employees is different from the federal government and every state in the United States. Now, the prior administration was trying to do some improvement on that. There was discussion about making it one law like every other state in the United States. And there was legislation in the city council. I don't know if it ever got to the floor, but it was written because I read it. I want to know what happened to those efforts, and under your administration, Mr. Attorney General, and Mr. Parker, what is going to take place in terms of correcting this problem?
In full transparency, I need to do some homework on that. If Rochelle Roberts, if you could raise your hand, my chief of staff, she can get your contact. It is certainly something we can look at. I would say workers' rights is something that I'm really passionate about. We often think about that in terms of compensation, making sure that we pay people a livable wage, but you make a very compelling point that people should also be protected with health and safety in the workplace, and that should be no different whether you work in Walmart or district government. So I don't want to speculate or speak out of turn, so I can look into it and certainly circle back with you.
I appreciate you raising that. I had not been aware that that was one of the legislative issues that was left unresolved last term. We do a lot of legislative work in our office in terms of where we identify laws that need to be changed or looked at. And thank you for raising that, and I can promise you we've now got it on our list of legislative things to look at.
I thank you. I just want to interject just one more thing. Also, under the Private Industries Act, just to call it the private sector, 32-1501 except, that you can get permanent total disability. Like if you're a Spanish illegal immigrant and you fall off a roof, but in the District of Columbia, if you're a District of Columbia worker, there's no permanent total disability. So you have to go back to work after so many weeks of disability. Also, I think, if I'm not wrong, that under Attorney General Carl Racine, he had some things in place to make those changes. You might want to look back at that. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Rebecca Parker Forsyth.
Rebecca, we can't hear you. There we go. All right.
Good evening. My name is Rebecca Parker Forsyth, and I have a few questions to ask. Firstly, the bike lanes. They are really a menace. They have put them everywhere in front of my church, where mostly seniors go, walking with canes, who used to park in front of the church or have someone pick them up. Now they have to walk about 2 blocks because of these bike lanes. When they first put them in front of the church, they were so wide, just as wide as a car. People parked there. We all got tickets. And so we have been talking about what can be done about some of these bike lanes. The way they have reconstructed in front of my church, you no longer go up 13th Street, and when you come out to 14th, it's some kind of a way where you have to come out. To me, I have to go too far out for the oncoming cars. You're afraid they may hit you, but I guess they did that for the bike lanes. So I'm just asking if there can be some adjustments to some of these bike lanes, particularly in front of churches, where seniors cannot come out anymore to get next to cars. And they're so wide, and they have taken up a lot of space, to me, unnecessarily. We have to park across the street if you can get there in time. But my church is really concerned about this bike lanes in front of the church. Certainly it can be moved or reconstructed. Secondly, I find that Walmart's no longer give out bags. They say it's the mayor's at her direction that we don't get bags. So when you go in there, you take your own bags, or I just want to know what is the reason for that. Secondly, why are not people allowed to use gas blowers anymore? They can use the batteries, but not the gas blowers. I'd like an answer to that. And bags in the alley, do you have to call 311 for someone because they stay out there a very long time? And so I don't know if you're supposed, because they drive around sometimes anyway, so I'm assuming they're just looking for stuff, but they stay out there so long. So I'd appreciate if you can address those 4 minor issues.
Yes. Was it Rose? Your name?
Rebecca.
Rebecca, all great questions. I'll try and go through pretty fast. So first, the bike lanes. This is an issue that we hear about all over the city, all over the ward. And in fact, it was recently on the news, I forget which program, that some 3/4 of district residents have concerns about bike lanes. That said, DDOT, which is our transportation system, they have what we call Move DC. It is very public, it has been vetted, and it details the bike networks that the city plans to install in the years to come. And so while it may be a surprise to many residents, a lot of the new bike lanes are part of this planned expansion of bike lanes throughout the city. So I would encourage you and others that are interested to look at the Move DC plans, which talks about the connectivity throughout the city. And the reality is that there are neighbors that are requesting greater access connectivity so that they can get from point A to point B safely. What you're speaking about is a very valid concern, that oftentimes what I'm hearing from residents is that there isn't communication, there isn't engagement or input, and I come out one day or I pull up to church and now I can't park where I've parked perhaps for the last 10 plus years. And that speaks to an issue that I'm currently working with DDOT on, is how do we improve their engagement with communities? So we already have the Move DC plans, and those plans had robust engagement around them, but it's also a question of who's engaging in these plans. Right. Are they coming to this community at these type of meetings to engage people, or is it just people that are self-selecting to go to the DDOT meetings because they have a self-interest in it? And I think that's a real growth opportunity for DDOT to make sure that they are engaging equitably across the city and communities. And I say all the time, people aren't opposed to change, is the fact that change is happening to them versus with them. And that is something that is near and dear to my heart that I think we can address. So I will flag again that if Rochelle, my chief of staff, could get more information about the church in question and the bike lanes that you're talking about, I would love to look into that and follow up. I don't want to make a promise that we can just all of a sudden remove it, but certainly we could look into what engagement was there and what can be done to make sure that there's easier access for seniors.
Do they have to be in front of churches?
The connection plan, they're looking at more like how can neighbors get across the city? And sometimes that falls within a church, but you raise a valid point about seniors and transportation and access. And these are things that we should be thinking about as we're making these changes. Again, if I'm holding 3 community meetings and I say, oh, everyone's in favor of these bike lanes, it begs the question, who's coming to the meetings? And so something I'm working with DDOT on is how can we be more transparent about that and reflective to make sure they're doing their due diligence to engage communities. One last thing I would say on that, there is a notice of intent process for every major bike lane project or transportation project. That is the greatest opportunity and leverage point that you, the Civic Association, any community member has to let your voice be heard. And after that notice of intent period, things are pretty much set in stone. So that is the feedback period. And I will gladly share more information around how those things are posted as usually on the DDOT website. We are trying to do better at getting that information out to communities, but it is a process. You asked about grocery bags. That was a decision that was made a couple of years ago, I believe, by the council's Transportation and Environment Committee. And the reason is because of concerns around climate change and the environment. We know that plastic use is a detriment to the environment because of its disposal, and they usually end up in landfills and in the ocean and other things. And so the effort is to do away with using plastic, not just in DC, but across the globe, really. And that is the steps that we took. Similarly, for the use of gas-powered blowers, the concern there is around climate change, the environment, and how can we have a less detrimental tool that you can use to take care of your property. And then I think you mentioned a plastic bag in an alleyway.
Big bags from lawn.
Yes, 311 is the place to call. I would also make sure when you get Rochelle's contact information, you can reach out to our office at any point and flag for us to say there's bags in our alley that is not being picked up, and we're glad to look into that and elevate it as a concern.
Okay, so you say the gas blower does what?
It is a concern around emissions, and it's it compounding to the climate crisis. And so all of those decisions around doing away with plastic bags, the mowers, there is requirements on buildings. There are some things that you may not feel, but developers now feel is an effort that as a city we're taking to try to shrink our emissions. We are working towards net zero carbon emissions by 2040, I believe is the date. And that is an effort to kind of slow down the impact of global warming. On record, DC is, and in Ward 5, is several degrees warmer than Ward 3, for instance. That we have heat patches. As you know, Ward 5, Rhode Island, for instance, floods regularly. The impact of climate change is being felt here locally, but it's also being felt nationally and internationally. And that's all in an effort for us to try to contribute in a very small way to help change the course of things.
So one last question. This thing that the city is getting ready to start that you had to apply for, I'm thinking it is to try to cut back on this mouse control or rat control. This thing that they start, compost. They starting, and you had to apply to get it, each ward. So is that to help with the rat control?
Not directly. The goal of the composting program, and it's a pilot program, is to lessen the amount of food and trash that ends up in the landfill. And so the idea about composting is that you naturally dispose of your food waste so that it then dissolves or disintegrates, and then that's one less food product in the landfill.
Okay, so it has nothing to do with rat control.
I wouldn't say nothing to do with it. In fact, some people are concerned that it may attract rats. And so there are points of feedback and approaches that the city is providing neighbors to make sure you care for it, put it in a safe place so that it doesn't attract rodents. Because it is a matter of you putting food products so that it can naturally dissolve.
Actual raw food from your table, it seems like.
Yes.
Into this compost.
Yes.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
We're going to take the last question.
My name is Wilhelmina Frazier. I'm a member of Union Wesley. However, I am a former DC public school employee. And I guess, I don't know whether it's a question or a statement, but I know that throughout not only DC, but throughout the US, lottery was voted in to assist with education. However, whenever there's a budget problem, education is the first thing that's cut. So I guess I'm asking, what happens with the lottery money that is supposed to be allocated for education? Also, there used to be, they used to have an officer-friendly program in the schools. Do they still have officer-friendly programs in the school where young people are exposed, you know, there's a communication between the police department and students or the community? You know, they see more of them, there's communication, you know, they get to know the people in the community. So that means that once you know the community, and once you know the people in the community, there's not as much of a threat. Also, in reference to, I'm assuming that some of them have been cut, when there used to be truant officers. If a student was absent, or even if they came to school late 3 days in a row, that meant there was one absent. So is there a way, is there a check and balance system where if students are absent, there's a resource officer or a pupil personnel person or someone who goes, because some of the things that many of our young people are involved in happen during school hours. So my concern is who is checking on when a student is out of school and they're committing, well, for lack of a better word, a crime at 12, 1, or 2 o'clock in the day when they should be in school. So, you know, is it that they don't have enough funds to hire people to check on, you know, resource officers to check, or even counselors? You know, many programs that are needed are being cut. Counselors are being cut. And all of this is important in a child's life in school, and it must start early. If it starts on the elementary level, then, you know, it moves up. So my concern is, if there is a budget, how is the school system included in this budget?
Great question. Several questions. And it is Teacher Appreciation Week, so thank you for your work in our schools. Several things I would say. Our lottery system isn't necessarily tied to funding. The lottery system is an opportunity for parents to apply, namely within our charters, and select magnet schools like a McKinley Tech, for instance. And the lottery system implies, as the name suggests, that parents fill out which schools they would like to attend or their child to attend, and they figure out which school they'll get to attend in the fall. In terms of funding, we fund all of our schools, district and charter, on a per pupil basis. And that amount of money has increased annually year after year. No different this year. The challenge this year though, is that, or the challenge in recent years is that we keep adding more and more schools to our portfolio of schools as a city. And in the district, we now have over 200 schools between DCPS and charter schools. And so as you can imagine, even if our pot of money is growing, it's not growing at the same rate and scale as the number of schools that we're adding. And there's been a lot of concern about this. The council last year passed the schools first funding budget approach, and I probably botched that name, but essentially says that for DCPS schools, they have to get at least the money they were allotted the year before. They can get more, but they can't get any less than the money they received the year before. And that is in part because what we see year after year is routine underfunding of many of our district schools, namely in wards 5, 7, and 8, and namely our neighborhood schools. So if you think Anacostia and Roosevelt and Dunbar, schools like that. Unfortunately, the mayor and the executive and the deputy mayor of education and the chancellor did not abide by that law this year, and they still underfunded several schools. And so now the budget is before the council, and we are trying to right that wrong. And when I say underfunded schools, that means Ward 5 fared pretty well, but let's say hypothetically speaking, Burroughs Elementary received $5 million last year. Now they're receiving $4,800 or $4.8 million. To give you an example of what I mean. So that's one thing. Schools are funded on a per pupil basis. There's a problem because the charter board in part keeps adding more schools, and now we have just such a large amount of schools. Two, their schools are funded also with weights and specialty programs. And so if you are a student that has special education needs or other things, a school gets a little bit extra money to be able to support your learning. We know year after year that schools, we are not adequately funding our schools based on those added weights that our students need. And so if you look at a school again like Anacostia or Dunbar High School, where you have over 80, 90% of the student population that should be receiving these added weights, we have in record that they're not receiving it. So all of that to say that we need to do much better by funding our schools. The bigger issue is we need to think more critically about the amount of schools that we have in the district to improve performance. I know Mr. Swain and I have had conversations at length around how we can go about doing that, but hopefully that addresses some of the concern. And one of the challenges that the council is trying to address now is making sure that we ensure that all schools, neighborhood schools, receive at least the funding that they received last year.
So when I said lottery, I meant like, what is it, Mega Million, whatever the DC, what funds they get from.
I see, that portion of those lottery funds.
And that's the main reason that people voted for
that's exactly
lottery right. in not only D.C., but in all of the states. When they proposed having lotteries, they said that it would be to help fund education. And apparently, that's not the case when every time you look around, not only D.C., but Maryland and Virginia, all school systems are complaining that they don't have the money in their budget to fund special services programs, special needs students.
That's right.
I came here from Texas, and I don't know how it is now, but I was extremely disappointed when I saw that students who had special needs were not getting the services that they that was required for them to, like the IEP might have said that they were supposed to get a certain number of hours of speech therapy, occupational therapy, physical therapy. They weren't getting that because they didn't have the personnel. I came here thinking that I was going to get a job in adapted physical education. When I came, I can't speak for now, but when I came, they only had 2 adapted physical education teachers in the entire school system.
Yeah.
That
is unacceptable. And that's the work of we need real oversight at the council. And part of not just the lottery system, but even the sports betting and gaming system. We were promised that a part of that money would go to our schools, and now there's a waffling and a moving away of that. And so you're absolutely right. We need to do better by that. Yeah.
I'm going to let Captain take the officer-friendly question, but I'll talk really briefly about truancy. We know that truancy is often caused by a variety of reasons, and the Office of Attorney General is charged with dealing with our truancy statute. So I know a little bit about what's happening. Normally, schools will have an attendance officer, somebody who's keeping track of kids showing up and showing up on time. We've got a project, a pilot project that we've leaned into called ATTEND. That's the acronym. We focused on several elementary schools and middle schools in Ward 8 to identify why it is that kids aren't coming to school on time and addressing some of the root cause issues, not to criminalize the kids who aren't there. You know, technically under the law, up until 12, it's on the parents. And after 12, it's on the kids. And you can be actually put into a criminal justice system for being truant, which seems like the wrong approach in terms of addressing what it is that is keeping kids from getting to school on time. And this program is showing great results in terms of identifying why in the community and with the kids there are obstacles to getting them to school on time. So the mechanisms are maybe a little bit different school to school, but basically schools do have school attendance officers who are charged with keeping track of who's coming to school on time. This ATTEND program has our people in direct communication with those folks in the schools so that we get a heads up, so-and-so's not getting to school on time, and then that ATTEND program gets out to their families, to their homes, try to figure out what's keeping them from school. And the stories are heartbreaking as to why some kids aren't getting to school on time, and it's not to punish the kids. That, you know, there are lots of reasons that keep kids from being where they should be when they should be there. And one of the things that hurts my heart the most is when I hear kids are afraid to come to school. And, you know, you can't learn. You can't learn if you're afraid. You can't get to school if you're afraid. So, officer friendly, I'm going to leave it to you.
Yeah, as far as the officer friendly program, we don't have something that was a program like there was in the past. We do have school resource officers, but it's slowly being phased out, and that's sort of a conversation that's happening between the police department, the city council, and the mayor on whether that will continue to be phased out or whether school resource officers will stay in the schools. I personally think they're an invaluable asset to have officers in certain schools because they do make those connections with the youth. It's sort of it's a position that I think is misunderstood because it's geared less towards enforcement and more towards being able to work with the school staff and families and children. But that's sort of part of a larger conversation about where police belong in society, essentially.
If I could just add to that just very quickly, I know you're trying to wrap. But last year, before I was on the council decided to phase out SROs from schools, essentially MPD's police force within our schools. At the height, we had 100 SROs. To date, we have about 40 SROs across the city. And to the captain's point, we've heard pretty loud and clear from a lot of school officials that they want SROs to stay in our schools. The mayor in her proposed budget put in language that would reverse the drawdown. So many may know that the mayor not only puts together a budget, she can also introduce legislation as part of that budget to support things that she wants to do. It is worth noting that when the mayor reversed the drawdown of SROs, she didn't increase the number. And so she could have said, we're going to have 100 SROs in schools again. She kept it at 40. And that is an important point. The captain is right. This debate is playing out at the council, and I imagine next week it will be part of one of the more lively debates, whether or not we keep police in schools. For right now, the decision has been reversed, and we will have 40 SROs next year if everything holds as it currently is. I missed part of the earlier discussion, but I think it's important for us to contextualize where we are as a city. with what's happening nationally, but also with MPD. Nationally, there is a crime issue going in major cities across this country. I don't think that's by happen chance, given that we're coming out of a pandemic. We also have an attrition crisis and a problem at MPD. Chief Conti at our last budget oversight hearing shared that on average, there's 30 to 35 officers that are leaving MPD a month. And at best, they are attracting 20 officers a month. Now, if you're doing the math, that means we're losing more officers than we're gaining. And I think that's in part why the mayor only put 40 SROs in schools, because the numbers just don't support for us to go much further than that. And so we have to think innovatively and creatively around how we're going to support our police department and think about what's next. A few things I'll say, and I promise I'm going to wrap. On the school safety front, I was proud to introduce the School Safety Enhancement Act, which seeks to work with MPD, but also to get non-police personnel to do some of the duties that couldn't be done, so that we don't, understanding we won't have 100 SROs again, probably for the foreseeable future, and it would mandate that those security personnel teams would be placed at each of our schools. They would have to design school safety plans, et cetera. That's one. Two, there's legislation that will be introduced any day now, and this is probably news to you all, that seeks to strengthen our police cadet program, to make sure that people in the police cadet program, which is a pipeline for MPD, get compensated more, and that we expand the age ranges that are qualified to be in the police cadet program. Why? Because we believe that is a stronger pipeline for folk in DC to become officers, and that we can probably trust that they will stay longer and probably do a better job. And so that legislation is coming down from the council and should be announced any day now. But with that context that we have an attrition problem, it is important that we have a comprehensive public safety strategy. And I'm going to keep saying this. I said pretty directly and pointed to the mayor that we need a strategy. It's not enough for me to do community safety walks. It's not enough for the captain. I'm glad to see the attorney general and the captain here tonight. But we need a comprehensive citywide plan for how we're going to turn things around. To her credit, on Wednesday, the mayor and the executive is hosting a public safety summit. And my hope is from that, we will start talking about how we're going to work in concert across our offices, across agencies, to kind of turn things around. Because it can't just be on MPD. It's not just a police or a council issue, but it needs to be a whole of government approach to make neighbors safe. So thank you for your question.
And with that, brings us to the close tonight. I just need to say that Queens Chapel Civic Association works hard on behalf of this community, not just to keep it beautiful, but to bring issues to the forefront. And we thank Union Wesley for continuing to be our partner, because what we did tonight is one of our efforts to try to bring issues to you. I get a lot of calls from neighbors saying, I'm worried about this, I'm worried about that, and most of it relates to public safety. And so we tried hard to match the schedules of the Attorney General and the councilman and our captain tonight, so that they could come to you to talk about what they're doing on behalf of not just the city, but what they're doing for the community. So I thank each of you for coming out tonight. We didn't have a large audience, but it's not that we didn't try. But I want each one of you to go back and talk to neighbors who didn't come tonight and tell them what they missed. And we will continue to work to bring the issues to you and the speakers to you, and we hope that you appreciate that. We thank you for your time tonight. Pastor Relford, take us home.
You mean spiritually, not literally, right?
That's right. That's right. You know that.
Amen. Again, thanks everybody for coming. We want to thank our communications team that made sure that everything was streamed. You can go to our website if you want to see this or you want someone else to see it. Again, it's available on our website, unionwesleyamez.org. Okay? Let's pray. Eternal God, our Heavenly Father, thank you for our gathering tonight. Lord, we thank you for the sharing and discussion that has gone forth. God, we care about our community. And Lord, we thank you for the opportunity to assemble tonight. Lord, we now ask that you would guard us and protect us as we prepare to leave and go back to our prospective corners in this city. Keep us safe from all hurt, harm, and danger. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen. And we ask that before you leave tonight, if you would please sign in. I know we had two entrances this evening, but we'd like to track, not track, but we'd like to stay in touch with everyone. We need your name and at least an email address. I know that the councilman as well as the Attorney General staff asked that we get